Brock Lesnar versus Curt Hennig. This one's as wild as the name suggests. In 2002, WWE chartered a private flight from the UK to the US after an overseas tour, and that flight quickly became infamous. Somewhere mid-air, Curt Hennig, aka Mr. Perfect, started roughhousing with Brock Lesnar. What started as playful turned intense and fast. Hennig, known for being a bit of a prankster, tried to test Lesnar's amateur wrestling background. The two began grappling in the aisle at 35,000 feet, with reports saying they crashed into the emergency exit door. Flight attendants and other superstars had to step in before things got out of control. The fallout? Vince McMahon was furious. Hennig was released shortly after the incident, while Lesnar faced no major consequences, probably because he was already being pushed as a future star. It wasn't malicious, just two alpha personalities going a little too far in a confined space. Still, it's one of those stories that became legend in wrestling circles. Imagine the tension mid-flight while two 260-plus-pound guys are wrestling dangerously close to the exit. Not exactly your average in-flight entertainment. Chris Jericho stands up to Goldberg. Now here's a surprise twist. Chris Jericho actually got the better of Goldberg backstage. This one went down in 2003, and I am sure you have heard this mentioned in some podcast or the other. Goldberg had just joined WWE from WCW, and there was some lingering tension from their past. While Goldberg was in the WCW, he wasn't too keen on working with Jericho, believing the latter to be beneath his level. Fast forward to WWE, and Goldberg reportedly made a sarcastic comment about Jericho. That's when Y2J confronted him in the locker room, and what started as an argument quickly escalated when Goldberg grabbed Jericho by the neck. But here's the kicker. Jericho, who had a legit background in submission wrestling, took Goldberg down and locked him in a front face lock. Apparently, it shocked the entire locker room. Goldberg was known for his brute strength, but he got manhandled by the smaller guy. The scuffle was reportedly broken up, and while no serious punishment followed, the respect for Jericho definitely went up a notch. What makes this one stand out is the reversal of expectations. You'd think the bigger, more intense Goldberg, who has always had a rather bully kind of vibe to him, would dominate. But Jericho showed that technique and confidence go a long way backstage. Batista and Booker T. Back in 2006, WWE arranged a photo shoot to promote their new SummerSlam poster. The stars of the shoot were a rather odd pairing of Batista and Booker T. Sounds simple, right? Wrong. There was already tension between the two, as Booker thought Batista had gotten a little too cocky since winning the World Heavyweight Championship. During the shoot, the two exchanged words. Booker called out Batista for acting like a big shot, and obviously Batista fired back. That's when it got physical, and allegedly the two ended up in a full-on brawl in a private room. Reports say Booker T came out on top, landing multiple punches and leaving Batista with a black eye. What's wild is how real this fight got, as it wasn't a pull-apart after two punches type deal. This was a legit scrap. Afterward, they reportedly hashed things out like professionals. They apologized, shook hands, and even went on to work together in the ring without any issues. But this incident showed that egos don't just clash on camera. Backstage politics and pride can explode into actual fights, even between top-tier stars. Eddie Guerrero versus Kurt Angle. Two of the best technical wrestlers ever. Eddie Guerrero and Kurt Angle had their moment of real-life tension back in 2004. This one happened after a SmackDown match where Eddie was frustrated with how rough Angle had been in the ring. Backstage, Guerrero confronted him about it, and as expected, Kurt didn't like being pressed like that. Eddie shoved Kurt, and the Olympic gold medalist didn't back down. He tackled Eddie to the ground and held him there. According to witnesses, Kurt didn't throw punches, and he just restrained Guerrero until it cooled down. However, both guys respected each other deeply. This wasn't a feud built on hate, rather it was a moment where competitive spirits boiled over. They'd been on the road, worn down, and emotions just got the better of them. After the scuffle, the two made amends and continued working together, even delivering classic matches later on. Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart. This one's as iconic as their on-screen feud. By 1997, Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart's real-life tension had reached a boiling point. The Montreal Screwjob hadn't even happened yet, but things were already spiraling between the two megastars. The fight happened backstage during a Raw taping. After some backstage trash talk, Bret had enough and reportedly attacked Shawn, pulling out a chunk of his hair. Yes, a literal clump of hair came out. It was fast, ugly, and personal. This wasn't just about wrestling politics, it was two guys who genuinely didn't like each other at that moment. Bret was seen as the locker room leader, while Shawn had a rep for being cocky and hard to work with. Vince McMahon tried to mediate, but the damage was done. Shawn walked out of the arena and told management he wasn't working under those conditions anymore. It added even more fuel to their already bitter rivalry, which would culminate in one of the most controversial finishes in wrestling history months later. Sin Cara versus Simon Gotch. Sin Cara has surprisingly been involved in multiple backstage altercations, but his fight with Simon Gotch stands out for how quickly it ended. It happened in 2016, and the story is that it started over something pretty minor. Maybe food, maybe a sarcastic comment. Whatever it was, Sin Cara didn't waste time. He reportedly knocked Gotch out with one punch, just one. Boom. Fight over. Wrestlers backstage said Gotch had a habit of rubbing people the wrong way, and Sin Cara wasn't the first to get annoyed with him. But the fact that the fight ended so quickly made it even more legendary. This one is often brought up when people talk about who's actually tough backstage. Sin Cara's name comes up a lot because of incidents like this. And while no one was fired, Gotch did leave the company not long afterward. Whether related or not, fans still speculate. The Miz locked out by Chris Benoit. This isn't exactly a fight, but it's a story every wrestling fan should know. Back when Miz was new to the locker room in 2006, he broke a backstage rule: eating chicken over someone's bag. Gross! That someone just happened to be Chris Benoit, and he didn't take kindly to that. As a locker room leader, Benoit decided Miz needed a lesson in respect. So he kicked Miz out of the locker room, quite literally, and the Miz was forced to change in the public restrooms for months. It wasn't physical, but it was definitely a form of backstage justice. Miz eventually earned the respect of the roster, but boy did it take him some humiliating times. Years later, Miz would become WWE Champion, and he openly mentions how this story reminds him of where he started. Sometimes the worst beatdowns aren't even physical. Big Show and Great Khali. Two literal giants in a backstage fight? Sounds like a Godzilla versus King Kong situation, and honestly, it kind of was. In 2009, there was tension between Big Show and Great Khali over who was the real giant of WWE. The story goes that Khali had been mocking Big Show's in-ring work, and Show didn't take it well. Backstage, words turned to shoves, and suddenly two of the biggest guys in wrestling were throwing hands. The fight didn't last long because others quickly broke it up, but not before furniture got wrecked. What's funny is that after cooling off, both men laughed it off. Still, for the brief time they went at it, people backstage were apparently in shock. It's not every day you see two 7-footers fighting for pride. Sheamus versus Yoshitatsu. Back in developmental, Sheamus wasn't yet the Celtic warrior we know today, and during his early days in FCW, he got into it with Yoshitatsu. Yes, the quiet, calm Yoshi. Apparently, Sheamus had been acting a bit arrogant, and they had a minor disagreement over some financial issue. Yoshi confronted him, and the next thing anyone knew, he slapped Sheamus right across the face. Not only that, he reportedly took Sheamus down in front of the boys. Sheamus didn't retaliate, and word got around that Tatsu had won the confrontation. Years later, Sheamus would become a multi-time world champ, but this early locker room story humbled him in a way that stuck. CM Punk versus the Elite. This one is comparatively fresh and still controversial. After AEW's All Out 2022 event, CM Punk ripped into the company, the EVPs Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, and Colt Cabana during a post-show press conference. This didn't go down well backstage, and things exploded. Punk and Ace Steel reportedly got into a fight with the Elite. Chairs were thrown, hair was pulled, and even a dog was allegedly involved. No joke. Everyone involved was suspended. CM Punk was eventually fired from AEW a year later. While this isn't WWE, it's part of Punk's long and complicated history with backstage drama, something that followed him all the way back to WWE, where he eventually returned in 2023 after nearly a decade. Santino Marella versus Jim Cornette. This one's less brawl and more smack to the face with consequences. Back when Santino Marella was just a developmental talent at OVW, Jim Cornette, who was head booker at the time, got furious over a segment. The Boogeyman was supposed to be terrifying the crowd, but Santino laughed during the bit. Cornette saw it as disrespectful to the business. So what did he do? He walked right up to Santino backstage and slapped him in the face. No warning, just popped him like a disappointed dad at Thanksgiving dinner. Problem is, this wasn't 1979. Times had changed, and Cornette got in trouble. Big trouble. WWE management didn't take kindly to a trainer smacking a student, and Cornette was fired not long after. Santino went on to become one of WWE's most entertaining comedy acts, while Cornette added another entry to his already long list of didn't hold back moments. The Big Show versus Chavo Guerrero. Who is the most deluded wrestler in the history of the business? Hulk Hogan lives on a different plane of existence altogether from the rest of humans. The man literally believes himself capable of time travel. Seth Rollins thought WWE was good in 2019 in his role as an anthropomorphic toxic positivity engagement account. Matt Hardy thinks he holds the key to AEW's turnaround. Then you have Chavo Guerrero. He hasn't said anything that mad in shoot interviews, but he did once square up to the Big Show. Back in 2004, as revealed by Jim Ross on his podcast earlier this year, the Big Show was busting Chavo's balls at the tail end of an arduous loop. The conflict was premised on Show burying Chavo for being short, and Chavo responding by calling Show fat and lazy. This was basically a message board argument centered on size versus work rate, except with a giant who could kill you on one computer and not some pale keyboard warrior. Before it got out of hand, Chavo apparently took an almighty shove before all involved realized it would be a sham of a contest. This one is just funny, since Chavo emerged with his life intact. Randy Orton versus Mr. Kennedy. Here's one that's short, sour, and career-altering. Back in 2009, Mr. Kennedy had just come back from injury and was working a match on Raw with Orton and others. During the match, Kennedy delivered a back suplex that didn't go quite right, and Orton landed awkwardly. That's when things turned nuclear. Orton went ballistic backstage, yelling that Kennedy was unsafe and reckless. John Cena reportedly backed Orton up. The next day, Kennedy was fired, just like that. A career that was once earmarked for the main event scene got wiped out over one rough bump and Randy Orton's word. Now, was Kennedy reckless? Some say yes. Others say Orton exaggerated. Either way, this moment changed the trajectory of one man's career forever. Chris Jericho versus Sin Cara. As we have already discussed, Sin Cara, the original one, had a reputation backstage for a short fuse. So naturally, tensions boiled over on a European tour in 2016 when he and Chris Jericho got into it on the tour bus. No one's quite sure what started it. Maybe loud chewing, maybe a smart remark, but Sin Cara reportedly threw the first punch, and Jericho didn't back down. He bit the guy in return. Like, actually bit him. It was broken up pretty quick, but WWE suspended Sin Cara for the incident. Jericho, who was considered the locker room general, kind of came out of it with his street cred intact. This wasn't Sin Cara's only backstage dust-up either. Let's just say his track record made this one less surprising. Brock Lesnar versus Chris Jericho. In 2016, Lesnar busted open Randy Orton hard way at SummerSlam. Brock elbowed Randy so hard that he bled out. After the incident, Jericho thought it wasn't scripted. He went backstage and started asking if Orton was okay, and no one gave him a straight answer. So when Lesnar walked back through the curtain, Jericho confronted him. Yes, really, Jericho is him. Chris Jericho got up in Brock Lesnar's face. Lesnar, never one to back down, allegedly said, "Mind your own business," and bumped him hard. Jericho shoved back and the two had to be separated. Triple H and Vince McMahon had to jump in. Vince later told Jericho it was planned and cooled things down. But the fact that Jericho was ready to square up with a dude built like a Viking tank? Legend. Randy Savage versus Road Warrior Hawk. Here's a lesser-known gem from the wilder days of the WWF. It happened in the early 90s at a hotel bar where Hawk, half of the Road Warriors, was reportedly under the influence and running his mouth. He made some offhand comment about Miss Elizabeth, and if you know anything about Savage, you know that was a bad move. Savage, never one to take disrespect lightly, clocked Hawk right then and there. The bar erupted, and other wrestlers had to break it up before it turned into a full-out riot. Both men were intense. Both had reputations. But when you insult Randy's lady, you're asking for a fight. CM Punk versus Teddy Hart. Back before either man made it big, CM Punk and Teddy Hart were on the indie scene, and let's just say their personalities clashed hard. At one Ring of Honor event, Hart was doing flips and high-risk moves after the bell, the kind of stuff Punk saw as disrespectful to the art of wrestling. Words were exchanged and then fists. The two brawled backstage, reportedly rolling on the floor before being pulled apart. Even back then, Punk had that "I don't care who you are" edge. And Teddy Hart, well, he was always a wild card. It never led to long-term beef, but it showed just how fiery both guys were, even before the fame. The Rock versus Shawn Michaels. Okay, technically this one never led to fists flying, but it almost did, and it's just too spicy not to include. Back in the 90s, Shawn Michaels was running wild backstage with his clique. The Rock, who had just debuted as Rocky Maivia, was on the rise, but Shawn reportedly did not like him at all. He buried him backstage and even tried to sabotage his push. There were multiple reports of verbal confrontations, with The Rock standing his ground but keeping it professional. Years later, Rock refused to work with Shawn even after HBK's return, citing old issues. It's one of wrestling's biggest what-ifs, a backstage Cold War that never turned into a fight but changed the course of WWE booking. The fans came put as losers of this backstage riff as they got robbed of a dream match. William Regal versus Van Hammer. William Regal is known as one of the toughest guys in wrestling, so it's no surprise he's had a few backstage altercations. One of the most notable events, confirmed by Regal, was in December 1991 at Diamond Dallas Page's Christmas party. Among the WCW guys in attendance was Van Hammer, who was being pushed by the company and was bad-mouthing foreign wrestlers. Regal obviously took exception, with Van Hammer getting in his face about it. Regal hit Van Hammer with a few headbutts, busting him open to the point that, according to Regal, it gave Hammer a scar that remained through his WCW career. Yet another reason you don't mess with Regal. Steve Austin versus Marc Mero. This one's not flashy, but it's a hidden gem of locker room tension. Austin and Mero had a match during the Attitude Era, and afterward, Austin reportedly chewed Mero out for being too flashy and not protecting his opponent properly. Stone Cold, ever the locker room leader, didn't mince words. Mero tried to explain himself, but Austin basically told him to shape up or ship out. No punches thrown, but the confrontation was loud enough that other superstars took notice. Mero's push fizzled not long after, and while that wasn't solely Austin's doing, the tension didn't help. New Jack versus Dances with Dudley. There are two shocking things about New Jack. First, that the man lived to the age of 58. Second, he wasn't kicked out of the wrestling business years before. His long list of bloody fights in and out of the ring are legendary, yet one truly stands out. In 1995, the Gangstas were facing the Dudley Boys, who were then a family of workers. New Jack took exception to Dances with Dudley's being too stiff in the ring. Rather than just words, New Jack waited until after Dances came to the back to crack him with a nightstick. Dances battled back, shoving them against a glass window, and poor Mikey Whipwreck was injured by being caught in this mess. Dances needed 12 stitches, and the locker room pressured Paul Heyman to fire New Jack. He couldn't, as the Gangstas were advertised for future shows, and some may argue this was a mistake by Heyman, as New Jack's antics would only get worse over time. Eve Torres versus Matt Hardy. The Hardy Boys are well known for some wild fights in and out of the ring, but nothing was wilder than during a 2008 European tour when Matt was kicking back at a bar. With a few drinks in him, Matt talked to Eve Torres, who had just started with the company. He playfully teased her on her experience, and they started some play fighting. In the midst of it, Matt accidentally elbowed Eve and gave her a black eye. Torres admitted she lost it, and too bad for Matt, she just happened to have picked up some moves from her future husband, Renier Gracie. She got Matt into a chokehold and put him right to sleep. As Torres was just an interviewer at the time, she obviously worried she'd be canned, yet she went on to become a multiple-time Divas champion. Maybe her knocking out a major star was what got her pushed as a wrestler. Joey Styles versus JBL. This is a famous story, yet still quite impressive. JBL may have remade himself as a big star in WWE, but has also been long criticized for his attitude, including open bullying of others. That's had him called out and fights with the likes of the Blue Meanie and others. So JBL naturally must have felt he had an easy target in Joey Styles, as the bespectacled announcer was hardly a threatening figure. All through a 2008 tour, JBL would mock Styles, put him down constantly, and escalated to a drunk JBL confronting Styles on a plane. How it happened varies in accounts, but the gist is that, amazingly, Styles knocked JBL out with a few punches. Even if JBL wasn't at his best, Styles taking him down like that was as impressive as not being fired for it. That made Styles a hero for every little guy standing up to the bully. Paul Orndorff versus Tony Atlas. Many fans will know of Paul Orndorff's fight with Vader, which led to Vader leaving WCW. But bigger was a 1982 bout with Tony Atlas, as both men were working for Bill Watts' Mid-South promotion, where Orndorff also moonlighted in Georgia. Some accounts vary, as Orndorff, Atlas, Tommy Rich, and Brian Blair were in a car, and Atlas and Orndorff got into it. According to the tales, the pair got out of the car and had it out in a crazy fight. When Atlas had Orndorff in a bear hug, Orndorff bit his ear, with later claims he bit it right off. And of course, Atlas has denied that he did the biting part. Regardless, while neither man was canned, Atlas did have the humiliation of being fined by Bill Watts for both missing a show and losing the fight. Sid Vicious vs. Brian Pillman. Given this was between guys from different promotions, one would have expected some punishment. In late 1991, both WWE and WCW had shows in Atlanta on the same weekend. So it was a rare occasion then when guys from both companies could interact at bars afterward. That included Sid Vicious and Brian Pillman, who had beef from Sid injuring Pillman with a powerbomb gone wrong during his WCW run. Never one to back down, Pillman challenged Sid, who claimed he'd suffered a bicep injury, but he later came back with the only weapon he could find, a squeegee. Mike Graham kept it from escalating with Sid leaving. One would have expected either company to punish their guy, but maybe they were too busy laughing at the idea of a squeegee fight to fire anyone. Nasty Boys versus Ken Shamrock. Before Ken Shamrock became a UFC superstar, he was given a hard time during his WWE days. One of the Nasty Boys is rumored to have instigated the confrontation with inappropriate gestures at Shamrock and disappeared before the martial artist could do anything. Shamrock went to the boys' hotel, confronted them with a few heated words, and told them they had some nerves pulling a stunt like that. Rumors say that Shamrock was clubbed to the back of the head with a steel phone, after which the Nasty Boys stomped the living legend with their boots. Although it technically wasn't a fair fight, the Nasty Boys claimed victory. Years later, Shamrock would meet them again by chance, only to have Sags walk up to him and brag about the victory. Shamrock apparently looked him in the eye and said he would unalive him. Sags, however, insisted that the incident took place a long time ago to no real avail. Billy Gunn, who was with Shamrock, had to calm him down. Despite being pulled apart, Shamrock chased Sags down and threatened to knock him out right there. Sags replied that it would be a felony, and Shamrock recollects the anger that immediately left him upon the realization.